We're good. We can go?
All right, hold on. I
Tell me
got,
when, bro.
can you hear me?
I do. I
All
do.
right, I'm good to go.
Let's go. All right, Joe Benigno, the Oda Pain Podcast, a special edition here on Tuesday, the final day of February 2023. And of course, the Joe Benigno Oda Pain Podcast brought to you by DraftKings, by Anita Discount Tire, and by the Hackensack Brewing Company. And joining us today, boy, the greatest defensive player in the history of the New York Jets, finally got in the Hall of Fame a couple weeks ago. Number 73, the great Joe Klecko. Joe, how are you, man?
Boy, I got to carry you around, Joe. You made me sound fantastic there.
Well, you are. I mean, bro, look, I don't think it's any question. You know, I said this. I thought it was very fitting that you and Revis went in together because you guys, you know, you're number one, he's number two as far as the greatest defensive players in the history of the franchise. So I thought that was terrific that happened that way.
You know, we were doing a podcast out there for somebody. I thought it was Sirius Radio, and he mentioned that. He said, you know, he goes, Joe and I were the two best players ever to play on defense for the New York Jets. And that's a pretty good compliment after all these years.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, tremendous stuff. And I'm sure up at Canton in the induction, because I think the Jets are actually playing in the Hall of Fame game now this year. And, you know, that's going to be a big day up at Canton with the two Jets going in at the same time. I mean, that's pretty good, Joe.
I mean, the Jets have had a pretty good year. You got two MVPs going in from the current team from defense and offense, two guys going in the Hall of Fame. And, yeah, they're going to play in that Hall of Fame game. I don't know who it's going to be yet, but I think it'll be New York West for at least a week out there, Joe.
Yeah, no question about it. No doubt about it, Joe. You know, it's unfortunate. The one game we got to play in is that Super Bowl, Joe, though. It's been a long time. You know, we're going, we're 54 years into it now, Joe. It's a little painful, I got to tell you.
Yeah, this getting close stuff isn't working anymore.
Yeah, no, definitely not. It's time to get it done. How did you feel? Now, I thought it was very interesting. So Joe Namath comes to your house in New Jersey. I know you live in Jersey. I won't say where, but you live in Jersey. Comes to your house in Jersey, knocks on the door. You had no idea he was coming, and basically tells you got in the Hall of Fame. Is that how it went down?
Yeah. Matter of fact, the Hall called me the week before, and they said to me, Joe, listen, if you're successful, because you had to wait for the vote from the 48 players, voters to, 80% of them had to rubber stamp what in my, anointment from the senior committee.
Right.
So they said, but if we can't get a hold of you, who at your house is living with you? Like I said, well, my wife and my youngest daughter is still home. Everybody else is married. So that I gave them their phone numbers.
Right.
And, they actually called my daughter and they said, listen, we're going to come here on Tuesday, I think it was, at a certain time. And they said, we got to keep your dad home between this time. And she said, well, my mom can do anything. My dad listens to my mom. So they figured it out. I had to take my wife to a doctor's appointment, which she didn't have. And
right.
When they were coming to the door, because I get up real early and I was hungry, so I had them order food. And so usually they answer the door because nobody comes to my house.
Right.
And somebody's knocking on the door pretty hard. So I'm kind of running at the door because they didn't answer. And here it's Joe. So I kind of opened it. I don't know if you've seen the knock, but I answered the door and I seen it's Joe, and I was surprised as hell. You could see in my reaction, and I turned to my wife and I said, "Hey, honey, Joe Namath came to lunch." But
right.
Here he is in his gold jacket and 14 cameras behind him. So you knew exactly what it was, and it was a very, very, very gratifying time.
Yeah, I mean, of course, no doubt about it. And Joe actually introduced you at the honors when they, unveil all the new Hall of Famers. Joe Willie actually was the guy that introduced you on stage as well.
Yeah, and Jim Porter, the president of the Hall of Fame, actually told me that, in the beginning when they asked Joe if he would do it, Joe said, I really don't know if I can, but then Joe, he called him back about 5 o'clock in the morning, Porter told me, and he said, listen, I didn't have to think about this. He goes, I'll come do it for Joe. So it was name it, his name it. Joe. He's an icon. He was the AFL's, face for a long time. And, he's a perfect ambassador for anyone. Joe's just a nice fella. I mean, everybody meets Joe. Joe makes them feel like they're his best friend. And, of course, I've known Joe for a long time now. And it was really, really cool to have him come and have him announce it on stage at the awards banquet was even a bigger plus.
No question about it. We're talking to the great Joe Klecko, Hall of Famer now after all these years, one of the great defensive linemen of all time. And for the people that don't know, the only guy to be named All-Pro at 3 different positions: nose tackle, defensive end, and defensive tackle. Let's go back, Joe, to the genesis, if you will, of the sack exchange. Because when I think of the sack exchange, the first year that I really think of is 1981.
Yeah.
To me, that's the year that you guys really blossomed into this, destructive defensive line. I think you had 66 sacks that year. I might be off. I think it was 66. Yeah. And of course, you guys finally made the playoffs after, the Jets hadn't made the playoffs for 12 years. 1981, you finally make the playoffs. Was that the year that it really just kind of all came together as the New York Sack Exchange?
Yeah, without a doubt, because, we were doing okay defensively. Then the draft year, the year before that, Marty and Mark were drafted, and
right.
really put the line together at that time. I mean, and then Mark and I became such a force, rushing the passer. And then, of course, we had a great running game with Freeman McNeil. The offensive line was, we had 2 first rounders to tackle, and we were doing good things. And, we thought we were going to even go further than we did, of course, because we got a little setback in the very beginning of the game. We were down 14-0 before you blinked an eye, but we were making our way back, and except for that interception that Richard threw in the end there, I mean, we thought we were going to keep going. But it was a great start for us in that 1981 year. I mean, we didn't know what the press was, and now we're getting shoe contracts, and
right.
We're going down to the stock exchange and shooting the films. It was just awesome to be that way.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And that 1981 playoff loss to the Bills, let me tell you, Joe, I still got hemorrhoids from that game. Okay, every time I see Bruce Harper, and I see Bruce quite a bit. He lives up here near me in Jersey, and I always bust him because if you remember, opening kickoff, he fumbles. Yeah. Charles Rome picks it up and runs it in for a touchdown. So I'm waiting 12 years for a playoff game, Joe, in the first play. They recover a fumble for a touchdown. Oh my God, that was one of the most painful losses, that Buffalo game. I'll tell you, Joe, that was a tough one.
Yeah, it was tough. Yeah, you know what? In the end of it, though, towards the end of the game, we actually felt we were going to have it.
Oh yeah, no, you guys came back.
Yeah, Bill Simpson, he makes that interception in the end zone. And it was like, the air came out of the balloon. It really did.
Yeah. I wasn't too happy with Richard Todd, but I don't want to get into that right now. We'll leave that alone. My greatest memory, beside that, a good memory of 1981, and I'll never forget it. The last game of the year, you guys are playing the Packers at Shea Stadium. Yes. If you win the game, you make the playoffs. Not only that, but the Giants get into the playoffs too.
Yeah.
Right. If you guys win, and you guys Lynn Dickey was the quarter. I was at Shea for that game. Lynn Dickey was the quarterback that day for the Packers, and you just destroyed. You must have sacked them 10 times, something like that in that game. How about that game, Joe?
Yeah, and I really felt bad for him because you could see he was ducking before long because I remember I came in one time and I actually threw the tackle over top of him, and he was ducking, to get away from it. So I mean, if you could ever feel sorry for an opponent, I actually felt bad for him that day.
Yeah, you guys really let him have it. I mean, there's no doubt about it. When you sacked the quarterback, okay, did you ever say anything to him? Did you say, pat him on the back and say, "Don't worry, I'm coming back again"? I mean, something like that. How about that?
There was only 2 quarterbacks that I ever said anything to them years. Was Burt Jones from Baltimore.
Right. Yep.
Burt would run his mouth like you wouldn't believe.
Really?
And I hit him one time. It's on a highlight film of mine where I'm spinning out of the clutch of the tackle, and I hit him with my arm, and he goes flying across the backfield. And I said to him after, I said to him, "Keep it up." with an expletive, so.
Right,
But
sure, right.
Jim and Jim Kelly, and Jim. I seen Jim at the induction out at the ceremony at the Super Bowl, and he grabbed me. We were in a meeting where all of the Gold Jackets were there with us.
Right.
He goes, Klecko, come here, tell that story to the media. I said, well, no, you tell it. So anyway, I was playing against the Bills, and I got a confrontation out in the middle of the field, and I said to Red Cashin, who I knew pretty well,
Right.
Red, what are you doing calling that? And Kelly turned to me and goes, oh, first name basis, huh? And I said, you know what, punk, now I know why people don't like you. And that really made me mad. So they're on the maybe 1 foot line about to score, first down. I came off the ball, offside. I came through the gap. I drilled him right in the face mask, and he went flying back to the 10-yard line. And he even admitted after his career that he said the hardest hit he ever took was that hit.
Yeah, I'm telling you, man, you were a monster out there, but you don't get. And I think because I go way back. I mean, I've been watching football since 1961, and I've been a Jet fan since '65, and I got the scars on my body to prove it, Joe. Let me tell you. But anyway, I mean, you run right up there with any of these guys. We talked about it. I mean, you want to talk about Bob Lilly or Merlin Olsen or Alan Page or Reggie White. I mean, you give me the great defensive tackle, and Joe Klecko is right there with all those guys. Well, I mean, really.
Two of them guys, were my idol growing up. Bob Lilly and Merlin Olsen. One of the great things that I had, Merlin did a lot of our games, and it was really a pleasure, to talk to him at times. Bob Lilly, Randy White tells me Bob Lilly's still pretty good still, but of course Merlin's passed on.
Right.
I don't know if I could be put in the same breath with Reggie White though. Reggie White to me, Reggie White was without a doubt the best defensive lineman ever to play football.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's certainly one of the guys. There's no doubt about it. And we're talking to one of the great defensive linemen ever to play football in Joe Klecko. Your relationship with Gastineau, okay? Obviously, when you guys played, it seems there was friction. You guys had a problem. And you know what's funny, Joe? You guys had a problem with the sack dance. Now everybody does. Now everybody does a dance after they sack the quarterback, right? I mean, it's universal.
Yeah.
But how about your relationship with Gastineau? Tell us about that.
Well, when we played, there was a lot of friction between us, and I think Mark just did SMY did a go around to a lot of guys I played with for a thing they're going to run about me.
Let me just stop you for a second, Joe. They also me too.
Oh, good.
I'll be in that as well.
Great.
Yeah.
But anyway, he called me, and him and I have buried the hatchet, and we get along very well. And he was telling me that he was telling the guy doing it. He goes, I hated Joe when we played, and I never really hated Mark. I truly didn't like the dance, which everybody knew. I was a lunch pail guy, and we didn't get along while we played that much. But I knew one thing: the only thing important to me ever was winning. All I ever wanted to do was win. And that year, I shot my foot up 12 weeks in a row before the game and at halftime, so I could walk.
You talk about 81 now? Is this 1981?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I was the defensive player of the year that year.
Yeah.
I would go in a cast all week long and not practice. And then right before the game, I would come out, loosen my foot up in a whirlpool, and I played in the game. And, I always felt that I had to be in the game for our team to win. And I think one of the factors of that was, I think in 1986, we were 10-1, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And then Lance Mel and myself both had knee injuries, and we didn't win another game.
Yeah. No, I know. Well, you won the playoff game against the Chiefs. Yeah. And then the disaster in Cleveland, which to me is still the worst loss in the history of the franchise, the double overtime disaster in the divisional round against the Browns. But I want to go back. Let's go back to 82, the strike year. You guys lose opening day. I was at Shea for this game. You lose to the Dolphins opening day. I think it was 45-28. Then you play the Patriots in New England. You win the game, but you get hurt in that game. right? 1982. I don't know if I guess you tore your knee up in that game, right?
I busted my patella tendon, my right knee. Yeah.
Wow. And now, so then you have, but that turns out to be the last game for like 2 months. You guys, they don't come back till like around Thanksgiving time. Whenever they came back to play, they wind up playing a 9-game season. But you came back, right? When did you come back in that season?
I came back for the playoffs.
You didn't play at all in the regular season after that.
No, I played in all of the 3 playoff games.
Right, right.
And it's one of them things again, like the trainers and doctors were just amazed. I came back from a major knee injury.
Yeah.
I forget who it was on the Giants. It was a receiver that actually had the same injury not too long ago, might be about 6-7 years ago. And he broke his patella tendon. They called me about it. And the reporters were asking me, Joe, you had
Victor Cruz. I think it was Victor Cruz, Joe.
Okay. And they said, I don't think you'll have a problem because, the tendon is a big part of your body, but a lot of blood supply. And I came back and played, 4 years after that, so, I came back to play in the playoffs because, again, there's that point I felt my team needed me. And of course, Shula had another word to say about the field that day, but, that was one of the reasons, that I came back because I felt we had a win.
Yeah, well, I mean, you guys came close that year. Again, we're talking to the great Hall of Famer Joe Klecko. That was a pretty good run. You beat the Bengals in Cincinnati. You blew them out, and they were the defending AFC champions. I think you beat them 44-13, something like that. Yeah. Hammered them that day. And in that great game, this is one of the great games in the history of the franchise. You go into L.A. to play the Raiders in a divisional game, 95,000 people at the Coliseum, whatever it was, and you guys win that game. I think the final score was 17-14. Tell us a little bit about. You remember that game, Joe? You get Jim Plunkett a couple times in that game, right?
Very much so. And one of the hero of that game was Lance Mel.
Yep.
Lance had intercepted the ball, and and Plunkett threw it right to him. I couldn't believe it. And we got the ball back, and Freeman McNeil fumbles the ball right back to them and gives them the ball back. 2 plays later, Lance does it again, intercepts the ball over the middle, and basically that was the end of the game. And it was a hard-fought game. That was the game where Lyle Alzado threw Chris Ward's helmet at him. And of course the Raiders were very, always, kind of guys want to mix up, and we didn't care. They said, "This is what you want. Let's go for it." You know what I mean? So, that was a great game. That was a hard-fought game, and that was the kind of team we were, and that's the kind of team they were.
Yeah, that was one of the all-time games, and if you remember at halftime of that game, you know the story about this where Walt Michaels. Yeah. Right. He gets the phone call. He thinks it's Al Davis, right? And it was some bartender from New York, I think, that called him. Wasn't that the deal, Joe?
Yeah. He was tearing the locker room apart. They had him because he thought it was bugs. Oh boy, well, that was one of Walt's prime games there, boy. That was
no doubt. Now tell us your relation, because Walt Michaels was a great coach, and I want to get into why he got fired. We got to get into that too a little bit, but Walt Michaels was a big factor in your career, right? I mean, tell us about your relationship with Michaels.
Well, Walt was a perfect person for me to come into the league with. He reminded me so much of my dad. I tell this story now, and like in the Little League, I would play shortstop and pitch.
Right.
And one day we're playing in a championship game there, like go to the World Series in the Little League, and I hit a home run to win the game. And I was left-handed. My dad sat in right field, and he would never come to me. Everybody's congratulating me, and I walk out to see my dad, and my dad says, "Why'd you boot the ball at short?" So that's what I was used to. Walt was that kind of guy. Walt was the kind of guy, do your job. And if you do your job, we're going to be fine. And that's all I cared about. Walt never yelled at me. Walt didn't have to yell at me. And other guys that needed that pat on the back, though, never really got it where, like, Walt could never coach today. You know what I mean? And he was a hard-nosed old guy. But when Walt was with the Philadelphia Eagles, he's seen me play at Temple. Okay? He was under Mike McCormick way back then, and he was coaching linebackers, I believe, in Philly, and that's how he got the job in New York. And he watched me play, and he was one of the main reasons that the Jets drafted me. So Walt was a big part of my career, no doubt.
Yeah, and tell us the story. We won't even get into the mud game in Miami, the disaster with that. You know, Don Shula, who I have never had any love for.
Yeah.
Okay, doesn't have a top. The whole deal. You lose 14-0. But what happened on that plane ride coming back from Miami? Because that's where Walt wound up getting fired. Really, right? Wasn't it, Joe?
Yeah. Walt was pissed mainly because Richard didn't come back with us. Richard stayed in Miami.
Really?
Richard Todd. Yeah. Richard Todd stayed. And of course, Walt was drinking and, he was mad. He was just mad about, everything that happened. And, the next day, he was throwing things and he was mad at everybody. So, but the next day, I think what was the key to the whole thing, when we came in for our last meeting to go, for the season to go home, Walt didn't address us. Walt had, I think it was Jim Kensel at that time addressed us, or one of the coaches, I forget who it was, but Walt didn't address us in that meeting. And then the next thing we do, we turned around and here we find out Walt gets fired about a week later after taking us to the AFC Championship game. And there was a real puzzlement behind it. There was a lot of things that were said that I can't verify for truth or nothing like that. But I guess Mr. Hess was a little mad at him about, not addressing the team at the end of that year. And, he just figured it was time and he let him go.
What a mistake that was. That's for sure.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the disaster was, that they named Joe Walton as the head coach,
Yep.
And I think Walt knew what he was doing. There's no doubt. And I think his input with the draft also was a big deal, how we put the team together. And I think, it was funny because, that's the last time Walt coached. And it was a shame because he kind of turned off to everybody because even I called his son when Walt passed away and they were going to have only a family funeral because I wanted to go up to, he was in Shikshini, Pennsylvania. And I wanted to go up and go to the funeral. And I forget what it was, a phone call I made with his son. He called me back and he said, Joe, Dad loved you and all that. He goes, but we're making it just a family thing. So it was tough on me at the end of the whole thing because Walt kind of turned himself off from the NFL from then on.
Talking to the great Hall of Famer Joe Klecko, and Joe, I really appreciate it all the time. Let's get into this a little bit. So Walton comes in. Okay, Walton takes over. The first 2 years that Walton's the coach, you guys are under 500. I think you were like 7-9 both years, if I'm not mistaken, right? Right. Richard leaves after the 83 season. That turns out to be a disaster and all of that. But Bud Carson takes over as the defensive coordinator, and that's when you guys started playing well again, right? I mean, how about what Bud Carson meant to you in your career?
Well, big time, because that's actually when I went down to nose tackle. Bud came to me and he said to me, he said, Joe, he goes, this is what we want to do. And he had Joe Green at the Steelers, who used to play that cock nose, but they played it in a 4-man line. He wanted me to play it in a 3-man line, and which is covering both A gaps, but slanting to one side primarily. And I said, well, you tell me what you want and let's figure this out. Do I want to try it? I said, yeah. I said, if you let me have a little freedom here, I think I can do this. And I figured out how to really make it work by blowing them gaps and going the other way. And actually, centers became baffled about where I was going, and they were a little bit off guard every time they snapped the ball because they didn't know what to expect from me. And I don't know what I had in sacks that year, but from nose tackle, I had a lot of sacks, and I made a lot of penetration, for the passing game, where everybody always thinks as a nose tackle, you're cannon fodder, you're taking up 2 blockers. Well, Boomer said something the other day. I was on the show, and he was talking about how he would protect against me, where usually when somebody got in a gap, they would slide the protection where they'd bring the guard down hard and the tackle down hard, And they said, we couldn't do that to you because we didn't know where you were going. He goes, so we had to pinch everybody down, which actually benefited our ends and linebackers because now they had to worry so much about the middle that they were freeing up guys on the end. And Boomer said it was a nightmare for us. And that's what Bud wanted, you know. And I think that was the one. I probably learned more about defensive football in the time that Bud was there with Dan Radakovich, and I learned more about defensive football than probably anybody when he was there.
Wow. Talking to the legendary, the great, the Hall of Famer, Joe Klecko. A lot of great, back in those times, Joe, a lot of great games with the Dolphins. I mean, nobody I hated more than Miami. I still hate them. I hate everybody that's not my team. You know how that is. But but especially those games against Marino. How much did you sack him a number? I mean, did you get because he didn't sack, not you personally, but Marino didn't get sacked too much.
No,
How
no,
about that?
and I don't think I ever sacked Marino.
Really?
Yeah, but what I did, I hit him a lot.
Right.
You know, because I remember that Don Shula was talking about it, and he said that there's only one person ever that he could not leave Dwight Stevenson one-on-one with, when that was me.
Wow.
And because Dwight and I had a lot of the same attributes. We were
Right.
both quick. He was super quick, and he
Right.
had great hands, and that was my game, you know. But I remember, I would always go in and I'd hit him low because I would be diving at him because he's throwing the ball. And Stevenson would always go to the referee, tell him what's he hitting him in the legs for? I said, well, tell him not to throw the ball so fast, I won't hit him in the legs no more.
Right.
He was the toughest guy in the world to sack. But the memorable game, of course, is the one where he and Kenny had a shootout.
51-45.
Yeah, and I think that was the highest scoring game ever in the NFL up to that point, which has since been broken. But for a time where they threw the ball a lot less than they throw the ball today, that was a pretty good game.
Yeah, that was 51-45 at the old Giant Stadium. And I'll never, you guys were down because I'm at this game. You guys are down 45-38 late. The last play of regulation, Kenny hits Wesley for the tying touchdown.
Right.
And then in overtime, Wesley caught 4 touchdown passes in that game.
Yep.
I'll never forget. That was one. Yeah, that might be the best win you guys ever had against the Dolphins. Was that?
There's no doubt. Yeah. Marino was just tough. Listen, them receivers and him they could seem to throw the ball with his eyes closed. He knew where they were. That was it. They had a great tandem. With Duper and
Mark Clayton.
I mean, the two of those. And of course they had a decent running game at times. But Marino was just such a great thrower of the ball. He really was.
Yeah, probably the best pure passer I ever saw was him. I mean, Joe Willie was up there too, but Marino was unbelievable.
I mean,
there's no doubt.
They talk about a lot of guys, but Dan Marino is, and it's amazing that they went to the Super Bowl one time and lost, but they never went back, and everybody thought he would be back for sure. But that's another one. If we would have beat the Dolphins in that playoff game, we had to play the Redskins. And Riggins ran all over them guys.
All over them. Yep.
Nobody ran on us. Nobody. And boy, I think if we would have got to that game, I thought that would have been a different story.
Was he the best quarterback you ever played against, Marino? Would you say he was the best?
I would say. I mean, I played against Montana, but
right.
Montana usually had a great running game with a good defense. So, but listen, Joe Montana is probably one of the best ever, also in the same category. But Marino and Elway.
Right.
Elway was the kind of guy that he was such a great athlete,
Yeah, he could run
away from you, and he had such a strong arm. I remember chasing him to his left, my right, on a sack one time, and he threw the ball all the way across the field for a touchdown, and he was on the 35-yard line. And I was like, he threw this off balance. I'm like, my God. So as far as an athlete and a great quarterback, I think Elway was that, but Marino, as far as just a tremendous thrower of the football, he was the best.
Do you remember the game? And I don't know if you remember. I'm sure you probably do. 1986 was a Monday night game against the Broncos in the Meadowlands, and you guys killed them. I mean, I forget what the final score was, but you buried them in that game. Do you remember that game against the Broncos in '86?
I got in a fight with.
He froze here a little bit. Joe, you with us? Yeah.
Recording.
Oh, you're back, Joe? We lost you. You froze on me for a second.
Oh, okay. All right. In that game, in the Denver game, I got in a fight with Keith Bishop, and he was a big left guard, and he got out of the game. And later on, when I was going around, when the Jets released me, I went to Denver for a physical. And who's the first guy I see in the locker room at Denver was Keith Bishop. And he goes, and he says to the coach, he goes, sign that asshole. I don't want to play against him. I had broke his larynx.
Wow.
In the fight, yeah. So do I remember? I remember the game well.
Wow.
Yeah, because they were coming out of their end zone and they were in a bad situation. So we stomped them pretty good that day.
Yeah, I remember it well. Again, talking to the great Hall of Famer Joe Klecko. When did you go down in that '86 season, Joe? Because I don't remember the game you got hurt in. You remember what game
I
was
believe
it?
It was the Pittsburgh game. And I was rushing the passer, and somebody called me from the side. Didn't hit me in the leg. Called me from the side. I already had some problems with my knee going into that game, and I went and worked on it, and I was wearing a brace for the first time ever. And when I went down, the trainers came out to get me, and I was on the field a long time. And I said to them, I said, all right, looks like we're going to hospital. So, I knew I couldn't do it no more. And then that's when I got, that's when I got fixed. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Unbelievable. It really is. Who was the toughest offensive lineman for you, Joe?
That's a tough one in a way because, I played the three positions and all of them had their, certain benefits or deterrents. And of course, at center was Dwight Stevenson. He was without a doubt, here's a guy, I guess he played 8 seasons in a row and he's in the Hall of Fame and he should be because he was that good. Mike Webster was always the kind of guy who was never a give up guy and a tough guy to play against. John Hanna at guard, without a doubt. John was the kind of guy, basically, that if you beat him, he wanted to tear your heart out. You could not intimidate John. John was never, he was always going to be coming after you. And of course, left tackle was Anthony Munoz. Anthony was probably the best guy I ever played against left tackle.
That's all Hall of Famers there.
Yeah, exactly.
Stevenson got hurt. Stevenson tore his knee up against you guys, right?
Marty,
was it not?
Marty, it's funny. 2 Alabama guys. Marty, they threw an interception, and Marty hit Stevenson. Not a tough block, but he hurt his knee on that game, and that was the last game he played.
Yeah, no, I know.
Shula was pissed. I went into the locker room to see him after that game, and Shula was raving. He wouldn't let Marty come in.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, he was pissed. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I remember that. That was crazy. The injury to Stevenson. Great Joe Klecko. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on now. Now, you made some comments that you don't want to see Aaron Rodgers with the Jets, right? Tell me the reason why you don't want to see Rodgers here, Joe.
Well, I always relate it to us as a team when we were growing up and us playing together. And I met with Coach Salah when we were out there when I first got nominated. And I was talking to him, and he told me something that Rex Ryan told him about bringing players in that know him. And he did that, and it really turned out well. And these are a bunch of young guys fighting together. And I said, that's what I remember of us. When we started winning, we had the guys that, and Joe Douglas's draft has been pretty good, except for, the quarterback situation.
Right.
Yeah, he's got some guys together that play hard together. And that's something that really unites the team. And I just think that if they brought Rodgers in, and, you've seen him in his condescending attitude at times with players, I just think that would hurt the Jets more than help them.
All right, so obviously the Jets right now, they're looking for a quarterback, right? It's not going to be Zach Wilson. Too bad Mike White gets hurt all the time because the kid's pretty good. I mean, the games he's played, he's been really good.
A smart quarterback, yeah.
No, so who would you want? So do you want to see Derek Carr, the quarterback of his team, or who would you want to see?
I say that reason being is because Carr, he's been an all-pro for a few years. He's had great years. And again, he throws a deep ball as well as anybody. And I think that's a big deal because they have that deep threat, in Wilson on the Jets and all. He also has been able to navigate the game and know the game well. I mean, Lamar Jackson, I believe, he's out there. But I think, I think he's more of a running back than he is a quarterback, even though he does,
Yep.
sit in a quarterback situation. He was an MVP, but still, I don't see him like fitting with the Jets offense. If the running back, it comes back.
Brees Hall.
Brees Hall comes back from his knee injury and is anything like he was, he may have been headed for Rookie of the Year type thing,
Yeah, no doubt.
And they know they have to secure the offensive line. So I just think Carr's a much better fit for them than anybody else that they're looking at.
What do you think of the coach? What do you think of Salah?
I think he's tremendous. I've talked to a lot of guys that do like I was talking at one point with Pete Carroll a couple of years ago with it, and then I talked to Howie Long a lot about it, and all the guys at San Francisco loved him. I always said the one thing about a head coach, I don't think a head coach has to coach that much as he has to get a team ready to play. Mm-hmm. And if he gets them ready, it's like, who's a perfect example of that was Dick Vermeil. Nobody cried more than Dick Vermeil. Okay?
Right.
Guys would run through a brick wall for Dick Vermeil. And that was a perfect example of what I mean by getting the guys ready to play. They loved him and they wanted to play for him. And you even see with Salah now, with Beckett, he's always thinking positive of him. He hasn't played for them yet. And last year he didn't play at all. As a first round draft choice, they were looking for a lot of things. And he never said anything negative. Always positive, always positive. And I think that's a great thing when a coach has your back all the time. You love that. And that's what he does. And I think he gets them ready, And listen, he calls them on a carpet too. A lot of times I've heard that, when they lost a couple games, he said, if you don't want to be here, we'll get rid of you. And he has that demeanor to him also, that side, but he also is all for his guys. And I think when you do that and, he's in the huddle with them and he knows that he has their back and all, I think you always get your guys to play harder.
Now, I want to go back to that because that to me is the one area that and maybe it's because I don't, we don't see it out there, because he never criticizes anybody in the press conferences or anything like that. But you're telling me that Salah does get tough on the players behind the scenes. Is that what you're telling me?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. He'll rip them when they got to be ripped. There's no doubt. I mean, I've heard a lot of things that he's done, with the people at the Jets and all. And that's what, listen, that's what a head coach has to do. I mean, he's brought in there to do what's right. And you have to be a psychologist today more than a head coach almost.
Right.
There's a time that you give your kid a licking, and there's a time you pat him on the back and give him a hug. And he does this pretty well.
I want to go back again. We're talking to the legendary, the Hall of Famer, Joe Klecko, number 73 in your program. I got the jersey right over here, Joe. In fact, I got it from you. That's the Jet. I got the Joe Klecko jersey from you. You know what I got to do? Because you signed it for me. What I got to do is I got to come down to Colts Neck or whatever, and I got to get you to put the HOF on it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then what I'm going to do once you do that, I'm going to put it up and then laminate it up on the wall here in my little museum that I have. You see some of the stuff I got behind me here.
Without a doubt, buddy.
Yeah, we definitely got to do that. There's no question about it. I want to go back though a little bit. Richard Todd, okay? Because I look at those teams, and he might have been the nicest guy in the world, but Richard Todd to me was the reason that my team didn't get to the Super Bowl when you guys were there. You mentioned the game against Buffalo, Bill Simpson, the game against, A.J. Dewey still running in the mud in Miami. What about him? What kind of guy was Richard Todd?
Well, I think Richard was pretty good for us, myself. Reason being is Richard was tough. Richard took a beating. And, Richard always kept on coming out. And you take the game against Buffalo, we're down 14-0.
Yeah.
The reason we get to that game is Richard. And the reason we almost won that game, I mean, I agree. You talk about tides turning, one little play. He doesn't throw that interception and we score. He's a different person. And then in Miami, he made A.J. Dewey a hero,
Oh, God.
Nobody ever heard about A.J. Dewey until that game, And again, they took our game away. They took Freeman out of the game. They took Maxey out of the game by having our speed. And they hurt us, there's no doubt. And then, of course, he's pressing to make the game work because the running game wasn't working at all. And he's pressing to make it work. And he makes two of the biggest mistakes he made in his whole career. and I've talked to Richard many times about it, and he's always, I'll apologize. I said, you don't have to apologize. We're not there if he doesn't play the way he does in the prior games. A lot of people didn't realize that, and a lot of people didn't realize when he got shot up in his ribs when he got hurt so bad that
Right.
he came out to play. And
that was that Miami game. That was that game against Miami when he hit Jerome Barkham in the end zone for the game-winning touchdown.
Exactly.
81.
Those are the kind of things that I look at for Richard, that, he was a great guy. And the one thing that letting the people know, Richard was such a great guy, like on Friday night, if we wanted to go out or whatever, Richard said, no. Richard used to take my oldest son, Michael, and Richard used to watch movies with him at his apartment, and then he could bring him back into practice on Saturday. Richard was just a great guy. And because of the things he did, that are glaring, which is the interception against Buffalo, and then of course the Miami game. People don't realize how many good things he did for us.
Right. How about your relationship with Joe Walton? To me, Joe Walton was a terrible head coach. Is that fair to say, Joe?
Yeah, I think and I'm agreeing with you. And the problem of it was, matter of fact, when he released me, and he said to me, he goes, "I'm doing it for your benefit." I'm going, "You're going to worry about my benefit all of a sudden?" And I almost came over the desk at him. I was so mad. He said to me, he said, "Nobody knows this." And he said to me, he goes, "Well, he offered me a coaching job."
Really?
Yeah. And I said, "You got to be kidding me." I said, "What do you mean?" I goes, I'm not ready to stop playing." And he said to me, he goes, "Well, what do you have to say?" And I said, "What?" He goes, "Well, at least you'd say thank you." And I got so mad. I was, so I left his office, and he was quite the detriment for us, I think.
Yeah, no, he was a terrible head coach. There's no doubt about it. Again, talking to the legendary, the great Joe Klecko. So, did you ever think about coaching? No, you don't want any part of that.
At the very end, every football player I think does the same thing because it's what you know.
Right.
There's two things I knew at the time was construction and coaching or football. And I called a couple coaches and all, and then one of the coaches that answered my call was Don Shula. Yeah.
Really?
What a great guy. Yeah. I got to know him a little bit after I played and stuff like that down in Florida. I actually was at Joe's Stone Crab one day. He was there eating, and I had a long talk with him there. And what a super guy. He really is. He was a football guy for the NFL and all the players, and he was a good guy. Great coach, tough guy. But I felt a lot. I have a lot of respect for him. And but like I said, I knew coaching and I knew construction. So I wound up back in the construction business.
Now you telling me what a great guy Shula was. When you were talking to him, did you mention about the no tarp in Miami in the championship?
I did not. No.
You didn't mention that, Joe?
No, I didn't. No. I didn't want to bring any of that up. I just said hi. It was great to talk to him, and he was going on about me. And I said, "Coach," I just came over to say hi. Yeah, but what a great guy, really was.
Wow. Yeah, well, I got no great love for Don Shula for obvious reasons, but I will say this, there's no question about him being one of the all-time great coaches. I mean, that you got to give him credit. You got to say that.
It speaks for itself. Yes.
Yeah, no doubt. The one game for you, the Joe Klecko game that's most memorable, was it that Raider game? Or which one?
Wow, I nobody ever asked me that question, Joe. That's a tough one. Listen, going to the playoffs, of course, was a highlight of our career. But, geez whiz. I think maybe the best game I ever played was the Green Bay game that we won at Shea the last game of the season. And, I know we had 10 sacks. I don't know how many times we hit Len Dickey, but we were living on top of him, So I think that was one of the better games I ever played, and all of us, because that was like we had to win that game, and that was one of the keys to it, of us getting after the quarterback. So that game stands out to me mostly. That's hard because again, I had a lot of good games I played in the NFL and a lot of fun games, But that was probably the most fun for me to play because sacking the quarterback is always a treasure for a defensive lineman.
Well, that was a fun day for us at Shea, I can tell you that. That was a party. We didn't get many. I think you won that game 37-14. I think that was the final score. And that was, that was a party day, Joe, which we haven't had a lot as Jet fans over the years. Big party days. You know what I mean?
I remember going to the parking lot, and I had Klecko's Country out there, and the guys who were ex-New York cops were all the guys that started it and all. And I was out in the parking lot with them until everybody left the parking lot.
Yeah, no, that was crazy stuff. One thing, and I'll let you go after this because I really appreciate the time. I can't thank you enough, man. Let me just say,
Joe, really, you and I know each other a long time.
We do.
I understand where you're coming from, and for me, it's a pleasure to do this.
Well, I appreciate it. I tell you, John, I got to tell you, this is true too. When I saw you on that stage finally to come up to get that from Namath that you were in, I mean, bless you. I got some tears in my eyes, Joe. I got to tell you, I got a little emotional for that because it was, so long. You know what else too? Gary Myers was from the Daily News all those years, was a big part of getting you into the Hall of Fame, wasn't he?
No, he was it. He was it. We didn't talk about that yet, okay? And I give Gary all his kudos because, I tell you the one thing he did that was really smart and out of the box a little bit. He put together a Zoom call with all of the voters. Excuse me, my phone, I've got to turn it off. But he got
maybe that's Gary.
Huh?
Maybe that's Gary calling you. You never know.
Anyway, he put together a Zoom call
with
all the Hall of Famers that played against me and a few more, which was Howie Long, and all the voters on the senior committee. And he said that was probably what put it over the top. And that was his idea. And that was a great idea, I said, if you're ever to thank anything over COVID, it was Zooms nowadays, and
sure.
He did that Zoom call, and he said that's probably what did it.
Wow. Well,
yeah, he was hammering it, and calling everybody and everything, and he really did a great job. I can't thank Gary. Everything, I owe it to him. I do.
One thing before I let you go, one thing that I've always been upset about as a Jet fan, for all the years, almost 60 years now, I don't think we've ever had our own home stadium. Okay. That to me, that's a big deal. I mean, even Shea Stadium, it was really the Mets stadium. Even I'm a Met fan, but it was still the Mets stadium. We always played in the Giant, even in Giant Stadium, even this place now, to me, that's still their stadium. I don't care how green they make it, Joe. It's still their stadium.
It's on that ground that used to be called. It's on that ground that used to be called Giant Stadium.
Right. Right.
I remember when we were lobbying to put the stadium in New York City. Remember down on the West Side Highway over there, right by the Javits Center, they had that whole plan over the rail yards to put the stadium. Now they built all the buildings. But I remember actually going to a rally in Midtown and with all the union guys and all, and I was up on stage. We were rallying, and one of the guys shot it down. One of the committeemen from New York City shot it down. And then that's when they went into partners with the Giants over in the Meadowlands. And I would have loved to have in New York, because, they were talking about how do you get there. I said, all the ferries come right to there, and you had the West Side Highway on a Sunday, it would have been great for us to play there. But you're right, Joe. You have a valid question there, and it is something that is missing in a way. But, listen, it is what it is. And of course, we all know the dollar bill works our day most of the time. And that was the only way that the Jets could have had, their stadium back,
I could only wish, Joe, like I said, I'm a big Met fan too. I could only wish that Steve Cohen would buy the Jets, okay? Because I don't think too much of Woody Johnson. I don't want to get into that with you, but nevertheless, that Steve Cohen would buy the Jets and put the Jets Stadium, okay? They could call it Leon Hess Stadium, whatever you want to call it, and put it right there, right across from Citi Field and where the Mets are, because that's really where you guys belong. Let's be honest about it.
Well, Queens was a big part of our life, and that's where the Super Bowl started for the Jets, and and like you say, even though it was a Mets stadium, also we have a lot of history there. There's no doubt.
Yep. Yeah, that's really where you guys should be, Joe. I can't thank you enough, man. I'm telling you. So what's do you know the weekend of the induction? August, whatever.
August 5th.
August 5th.
Yeah, the game's going to be on Thursday. and the induction ceremony is going to be on Saturday at noon.
Wow. Might have to get out to Canton for that one. That's going to be a big day for the Jet fans. You know what I mean?
Oh, there's no doubt. There's going to be a lot of people there from New York. Yep.
Yeah.
With me and Remus going in and playing, they're also going to be playing in the game. That's going to be pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, Joe, we finally get that Super Bowl. You know, I only hope. Look, I always say this, Joe. I'm going to be 70 years old this year. When we won the Super Bowl III, back in January of '69, I was 15. 15, Joe. I'm going to be 70, and we still haven't been there, Joe. It's mind-boggling, mind-boggling, Joe.
I think there's a couple things here to play, and Joe Douglas. I believe that my Danny, when Danny was down in Philly, he was doing pre and post game shows, and he got to know Joe a little bit down there. When he got the job, he said, "Dad," he goes, "this guy really knows what he's talking about," and I think Joe's proven that. Of course, the quarterback situation,
right.
You give him a pass almost, but I think Salah as a head coach, I think he's got it all together. I don't remember the coach's name the other 2 years ago that died in the biking accident.
Oh, yep.
For the passing.
Greg Knapp.
Yeah, and I think he just brought in Hackett. So I think he does know what he's doing. Defensively, there's no doubt they're a great football team. But if they get the offense turning, and I was at the Jet complex yesterday, and Joe Douglas expressed the time he's going out to Indianapolis now, and the free agency system in the offensive line is a big priority.
Yeah, no, they got to fix the offensive. That's the number one draft choice has to be an offensive lineman, no doubt about it. But Joe, I pray for the day we win the Super Bowl again while I'm still on the earth, and someday maybe we have our own stadium. I don't know if I'll be alive for that, but our own stadium, and we'll have a statue of Joe Namath and a statue of Joe Klecko outside the Jet Stadium. You know what I mean?
I know if it was up to you, Joe, it would be that way. I know.
Oh, please. If it was up to me, forget about it. Forget about it. Joe, if it was up to me, we might have won a few Super Bowls already. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'll take my chances. You know what I mean? Let me own the team. I'm not a coach. I'm not a personnel guy or anything like that, although I think I got a pretty good feel of because I watch a lot of the college football. But you know what? Let me own the team and call the shots that way. We would have won already.
Joe, you've always been, and everybody knows you're a monster Jet fan. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, Joe, nothing but love for you. I appreciate it. I appreciate you coming on. And one more time, congratulations on finally getting into that Hall of Fame, because there is no question you're one of the greats to ever do it. Let me tell you right now.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it.
Joey, all the love. Thank you so much. We'll talk. We'll get together so I can get
I gotta sign that jersey, so
we'll work it out. I'll give you a call. We'll work it out. Even if I come down to your place, we'll straighten it out.
Thanks, Joe.
Joe, all the love, bro. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Let me finish it off here, though. And let me just say again before we go here, the great Joe Klecko, how great was he? Can't thank him enough for coming on. I want to thank everybody for listening. Let me get my sponsors in here again. I'm just going to run them down. Of course, the Hackensack Brewing Company, of course, DraftKings, and of course, Anita Discount Tire. Special Tuesday edition of the Ode to Pain podcast with the Hall of Famer, the great Joe Klecko. We'll be back. We'll talk to you Friday for our regular Friday Ode to Pain podcast. All the love, everybody.